Mr. Prime Minister, thanks for the time.
My pleasure, always.
You know, we just got back from Riyadh. I know you heard those words from the Saudi Crown Prince. What was your response?
Well, I was delighted to hear what he had to say, and to borrow a phrase, I think we're getting closer to peace every day that passes.
You talked about it today in your UN speech. You talked pretty optimistically about it.
But I believe that we are at the cusp of an even more dramatic breakthrough, an historic peace between Israel and Saudi Arabia.
Yes, I did, and that's not to minimize the hurdles before us, but I think when you have three leaders and three countries that avidly want a result, the United States under President Biden, Saudi Arabia under the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, and Israel under my premiership, I think that really raises the possibility that we'll succeed.
Here are the specific words he said. So you think, if you were to characterize it, are you close?
Every day we get closer. It seems it's, for the first time, a real one, serious. We're going to see how it goes. For us, the Palestinian issue is very important. We need to solve that part.
How do you solve that part? Are you willing to give concessions when it comes to the Palestinians, specifically?
I think the Palestinians should be part of the process, but I don't think the Palestinians should have a veto over the process. And the reason we didn't have, for a quarter century, any new peace treaties after we made peace with Egypt and Jordan, we didn't have for 25 years a single new peace treaty, because everybody said, first you have to satisfy whatever the demands of the Palestinians are. You got to conclude a peace treaty with the Palestinians. Well, there was only one problem with that. The Palestinians don't want a peace with Israel, they want a peace instead of Israel. They don't want a state next to Israel, they want a state instead of Israel. So that wasn't going to get us anywhere. In fact, the reason we got to the Abraham Accords is because we finally went around the Palestinian veto and went directly to the Arab capitals. And I think it would be a grievous mistake to accept a Palestinian veto. They should be part of the process. They can benefit a great deal from the process. I'm willing to consider ways that they could benefit from the process without ever sacrificing our security or our national interest. But I think they can be part of the process, but not have a veto power over the process. I said that about 4 times, so I think I got my point across.
Right. When you met with President Biden, did he specifically ask you to make concessions to the Palestinians?
Well, we talked about it. We talked about, not concessions, we talked about this part of the possible agreement that we would have, as well as other things. We talked at great length
about preserving the opportunity for a two-state solution, or pledging to cut back on settlements, or pledging not to annex the West Bank. Those things specifically did he ask of you?
Well, I'm not going to get into the particulars of the discussion, but he did say, if I can make a general thing, that he'd wanted to keep the option, the political option of 2 states open. He didn't, I wouldn't go beyond that in detailing what we talked about.
Because it's in the part of the negotiations right now. But you have a coalition, it's the first in 8 decades, that in the party platform, essentially, it calls for annexing the West Bank. Different words, but that's essentially what it says. So will you say that that's not going to happen to make this deal work?
I will, first of all, not do anything that jeopardizes Israel's security, but I also will do what I think is necessary to advance peace, which also serves in the long run Israel's security as well. And I think there is a balancing act. The coalition is not the issue. The issue is what I believe are the important things for Israel's future. And not all my coalition partners have exactly the same view, but ultimately they joined the Likud. The Likud didn't join them. And I think when push comes to shove, and we have a historic agreement that changes the Middle East, by the way, I think it changes the world, then I think everybody will be on board.
You think they'll come on board? But
yeah, they've come on board on quite a few things. Ultimately, there's a mainstream decision, a policy direction that my government, under my leadership, decides, and I think they're responsible enough to go along, and I think they will on this issue too.
The Religious Zionism Party said they were making clear that any normalization that includes compromises to the Palestinians or a possibility of a Palestinian state, they would block. I mean, they're being very vocal about it.
Well, I'm not going to get into the internal discussions that we have either with the White House or with my coalition partners. You remember Woodrow Wilson, the great American president, after World War I, he was in the Versailles Peace Conference, and he declared, "I believe in open covenants openly arrived at." Well, I have a slight change to that. I believe in open covenants secretly arrived at. And so I won't get into the machinations of either, coalition politics or, for that matter, international negotiations. But I think it's doable. I think we can get there.
It's going to be complex, but you feel a real confidence that it's going to happen.
I feel a mission, Bret. I had to go a long way, and I had these arguments with coalition partners and with the political adversaries and the so-called international experts. And for many years, I argued we can get these 4 peace treaties if we go around the Palestinian veto. Nobody believed me, and finally we did it. And it worked. And today, I'm telling you, we can overcome these hurdles and these obstacles, and we can get to a pivot of history, another enormous breakthrough, a Saudi-Israeli peace that not only changes the Middle East, creates a new Middle East of peace and prosperity, but also creates a corridor from Asia to Europe, India, UAE, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Israel, and from there our Mediterranean ports to all of Europe. It's an amazing transformation.
Yeah, that rail and ports deal announced at the G20,
right.
I mean, you see that as really significant?
I think it's part of the possibility. It's also fiber optic cables and energy pipelines that traverse the Arabian Peninsula, go through Israel, service Europe. I think these are realistic things, but the possibilities are real. And it also, it changes the relationship between Judaism and Islam, between the holy seat of Judaism, Jerusalem, the holy seat of Islam, Mecca, and that radiates to 1 billion and more Muslims. That's a historic shift, and I think it's worth investing in. Am I confident? I believe there's a greater chance that we'll achieve it, but I will say this. I think that we have a window of opportunity. It's the next few months. If we don't achieve it in the next few months, we might delay it by quite a few years. We'll probably in the end achieve it because it makes sense. But I think if we want to seize the opportunity, this historic opportunity, we have to do it in the coming months.
What's your sense of the 38-year-old Saudi leader, Mohammed bin Salman?
I think he's shown to be quite a visionary, both in the transformation of his own country and the larger picture that we share for transforming the Middle East. I think that's visionary leadership. What other kind of leadership is useful? Nothing. If you just come in there to sit and change nothing and do nothing to improve the conditions of your people, your region, and the world, go do something else.
Al Arabiya took your speech today.
وقعنا على 4 اتفاقات سلام بالعمل مع الولايات المتحدة.
That's pretty significant. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine a speech of an Israeli leader, being broadcast live in Saudi Arabia? Now that tells you something.
Another thing the Crown Prince said is this: if they get one, will you?
If they get one, we have to get one for security reasons and for balancing power.
What do you think about that?
I think they shouldn't get one. I think Iran should be prevented in every possible manner from getting nuclear weapons. I've devoted the bulk of my public service as Prime Minister to prevent that from happening, and we delayed it by quite a few years. But the jury is still out. We have to do everything we can. And the most important thing that we can do, aside from crippling sanctions against Iran, snapping back the sanctions if Iran violated, as it has, its commitments, is to have a credible military threat against Iran. And so I don't think they should get it. And if they don't get it, we also will not be in this conundrum of other countries wanting to get nuclear capability, nuclear weapons capability.
You're facing a lot of protests, a lot of pushback in your own country about this judicial reform effort. Will you abide by what happens in the Supreme Court this case going forward, whatever comes out of the Israeli Supreme Court on this?
We've always abided by the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court always abided by the law, the basic laws that the Knesset, our parliament, legislates. And I think that's what we should, and this dual commitment should be kept.
But you don't have a constitution, but explaining it to Americans, that it is a checks and balances, but isn't the Supreme Court that check and balance? If you control the executive and the legislative?
No. In all democracies, you have a balance between the will of the majority as reflected in the legislature and the executive, and protecting minority or individual rights, so which is supposedly the province of the court. In Israel, that balance has been changed over the last 25 years, and the court arrogated systematically all the powers or most of the powers of the executive and the legislative. What we're trying to do is bring it back somewhat to a balance that is common in America and all the other Western democracies.
But there are people who see this as a big shift. You say somewhat, and you described it as a small shift, but you have 40 weeks of hundreds of thousands of people taking to the streets to protest this. You had your Attorney General refuse to defend this in court, and you hired outside counsel to do it. So it is splitting your country apart, isn't it, as far as this issue? It's
got two parts. Parts of the protest are overtly political, and they only want to bring the government down, and they say so. So they don't care about the judicial reform. They just want to use any pretext to try to bring the government down. The other part is concerned, and I think they're mistaken because they think we want to take it to a place we don't want to take it. The real issue right now before us is how do we select Supreme Court judges, okay? In Israel, in America, and in most democracies, the elected officials, the politicians, choose the judges in one system or another, okay? In Israel, the protesters think that that would be the end of democracy. What is common in all democracies, that you balance the power of the Supreme Court by choosing the judges. They say in Israel the politicians should not really be doing this. And this is one of the things, this is the thing that we're focused on, if you want to know. It's not the end of democracy, because if it is, then we don't have any democracies anywhere on earth. So there's a lot of distorted discussion. I'm looking now, and I've been looking now for 9 months, to find a consensus, if I could, with some of the opposition or all of it, the political opposition in the Knesset, and if not, to find something that appeals to the broadest possible segment of the public. And I think we'll get there. And when the dust settles, I guarantee you, and it will settle, you'll see that Israel was a democracy, is a democracy, and will actually be even a stronger democracy, more similar to other democracies in the world.
Last thing on this, your outside counsel was asked by the Supreme Court, what happens if Israel, the government passes a law saying that there won't be an election for 10 years.
That's
impossible. I know. And then he answered, well, it would be solved by another election. In other words, there are real questions about that checks and balances from the outside looking at it. And I'm sure President Biden expressed that in your meeting as well.
No, we discussed, he asked me to describe what we're doing, but we didn't get well beyond that because we've had opportunities, other opportunities to discuss it over the phone. I can tell you this, what if the Supreme Court decides there are no elections for 10 years? It doesn't work that way. I mean, you can take it to ad absurdum, to all these things. But the way it works, Israel hasn't had, the Knesset never decided that in our 75 years, and I guarantee you it will never decide that in the future. There are checks and balances. Right now in Israel, the Supreme Court has no checks and no balances. We have to restore some of it, but we have to do it carefully and responsibly, and that's what I'm doing.
And you think you can come to some concession, some conclusion?
Consensus? I'm seeking it, certainly. I hope to achieve it. But I won't tell you it's easy, but being the Prime Minister of Israel has got to be the easiest job in the world.
I don't think so. Were you surprised that Saudi Arabia normalized relations with Iran before they normalized relations with you?
Well, first of all, you have to understand that there's been normalization before the Abraham Accords, and there is normalization. For example, in 2018, 2 years before we signed the Abraham Accords, Saudi Arabia opened its airspace to Israelis who could now fly over the Arabian Peninsula to destinations in the Gulf, in Asia, India, Australia, and so on. That didn't happen accidentally. And I don't think the Abraham Accords would have happened without tacit Saudi support and approval. So we've had some preliminary indications, shall I say that we have that we're moving to normalization. As far as the Saudi approach to Iran, I'm sure if you spend some more time with the Saudi leadership, they'll tell you that they welcome peaceful relations with everyone, but I'm not sure that they have changed their view about Iran's intentions or its innate aggression.
Do you think solving the Yemen problem is a big part of all of this as well?
It helps, but I think the larger question is Iran's ideological impetus to conquer the Middle East, destroy Israel. They chant death to Israel and they chant death to America. They want to build ICBMs that can carry nuclear weapons, not against us, because they can reach us without it, but against you, and to hold America hostage to their crazy demands. That's something we all have to work on to stop, for the sake of Israel, our Arab neighbors, America, the world.
You met with Elon Musk.
Yeah.
Interesting character.
Well, I think he's a tremendous visionary. I was enormously impressed. I must say, I just mentioned in a speech I gave at the UN something that I heard from him. He said, imagine a world where you have the end of scarcity, something that eluded mankind up to now. And I think he sees both the great blessings of AI, as I do, but he also sees the great perils of AI, as we all should. And I think he's one of the most inspiring and stimulating people that I've met in my lifetime. I met quite a few. And I met some of his colleagues, including here in New York and also there in California. So I think that Israel is an important AI player. And I think we have to fashion an international approach that will enable us to maximize the blessings of AI while containing the curses of AI. They are legion on both sides of the equation.
As we wrap up here, is it fair to say that I leave you hearing that you are optimistic?
Yes. Categorically, yes.
Mr. Prime Minister, we appreciate your time.
Thank you.